Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's Vanna over at the ASDC. Thank you for joining us for this week's Thursday Train to Win webinar. I know that we are a few minutes late taking off here. We're having some technical difficulties, but we are underway now. But again, thank you for joining us. As you can see there on your screen, this week's webinar will focus on some hiring and management best practices for you all for 2017. I know that it is still early in the year, and the focus for many of you is organization building, as well as putting together strong teams to be able to implement some of the strategies for this year. So we wanted to take the opportunity to focus on some best practices for you all as it relates to job posting, um, best practices for interviewing, managing teams, big and small, regardless of how big your state party is. So that's the focus of this afternoon's webinar. I know that we have a number of new EDs and state chairs across the country. Don't know the background of everyone, if everyone has experience in hiring and management. So I thought it'd be a good idea to put this webinar in very early in the year to provide you all some best practices, as well as to open the floor for some discussion. Should you all have any comments to add throughout the webinar, some best practices from your particular state or from your particular management experience, we always welcome that in our webinars. But joining us this afternoon for the webinar is Crystal Piles, who is the Director of Human Resources here at the Democratic National Committee. And so we'll hear from Crystal in just a few minutes. But before we dive in, I do want to go over a couple of housekeeping items with you all. First things first, when that slide pops up here, you all are in listen-only mode. So you are able to hear me, but unfortunately I can't hear you. But if you all have any questions, as I mentioned earlier, we want to make our webinar series as interactive as possible. So if you all have any questions throughout the webinar, any comments, feel free to click the raise my hand icon. We'll unmute you so that you can ask your question and speak to Crystal. Or you can type your question into the questions box if you don't have a microphone on your computer. So either way, we we invite questions. We want to make our webinars as interactive as possible. I've said before, I've wanted to have everyone unmuted during our webinars, but inevitably a barking dog will walk by or a crying baby will be in the background, so we just can't do that. Lastly there, before I turn it over to Crystal, I do want to encourage you all to connect with us via social media if you are not already following the ASDC on social media. Our Twitter handle is listed there for you. It's @DemChairs. So if you're not already following the ASDC, please do so. And then also the hashtag that we use for our webinar series is #train, the number 2, and then win. So definitely connect with us via social media. We are definitely trying to increase our social media presence these days. So go ahead and follow us. So without further ado, and before I turn it over to Crystal, I do want to also note that if you all are ever having any technical difficulties throughout the webinar, I know that Wi-Fi goes in and out, and we can't always tell on our end when things are going out. So if you'll type that into the questions box, if ever I go out or if Crystal goes out for whatever reason, just type that into the questions box to let us know. So with that said, without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Crystal to kick us off and to talk about hiring and management. Crystal?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I want to thank the ASDC team for inviting me today. I do want to give you a fair warning if I seem a little winded while I'm speaking. I am expecting, so please forgive me. However, some of the topics that we're going to discuss today will be best practices for writing job postings, developing interview questions, avoiding discriminatory interview questions, scouting and selecting the strongest candidates, establishing a team culture, assessing employee performance reviews and other metrics, balancing and expanding your team and team dynamics, resources related to this presentation that state parties may use in respective hiring management process. Excuse me, guys. So the next slide we're going to So, hiring. If it were only that easy, we wish. Hiring effectively should be a well-planned process. Often we focus on speed of getting someone on board without thinking forward as to how a bad hire can create more problems in the future. By creating a process for hiring, you can hire high-quality talent quickly and efficiently. Before you can even begin the hiring process, it's important to focus on creating the optimum job description for the role desired. The first step is to tailor the job description to your audience. In other words, who are you going after? This is your opportunity to tell all potential applicants the type of person you're looking for. You'll need to clearly lay out specifics, and what I mean by that is using specialized words or words that are relating to the field. You should use very specific language so that you can get the best applicants possible. A job description that is written too broadly can encourage too many applicants who do not have the desired skill set for the role. Also, you should plainly state the core requirements. At a minimum, any person who you interview should be able to meet the core requirements, so you don't want to understate what you absolutely need. You should also use keywords. Dynamic wording can attract better applicants and get them excited about the potential of the role. You should provide a clear and effective title. Too many times I've seen job descriptions with titles that are either overly broad or narrow and don't accurately convey what the job entails. I've also seen job posts that the header doesn't match what's in the body. Job titles, as we know, mean a lot to millennials, so in lieu of pay, they'll take a great job title instead. So it's very important to make sure that your job titles are eye-catching and attract the great talent that you're seeking. So now we're going to get into job posting best practices. First and foremost, a job description is a marketing tool. This is your opportunity not only to find the right candidate, but your chance to highlight your organization, its mission, and why someone would want to work there. Ideally, you can sum up the opening paragraph that captures your organization. As you write the perfect job description, there are several questions you should ask yourself before you actually post it. Will people respond to the post, or is it effective? Did you write it well, and does it capture everything you want to tell your audience? Did you tell them all the specifics? While the job post should not be overly long, it should tell them what the role entails, the type of culture, the location, the systems and the skills needed, etc. If those specifics are not present, then your job post is not ready for distribution. Does it describe your benefits, traditional and non-traditional? And does it motivate them to apply for the job? To continue, you have to remember you cannot cut corners when you're pulling together the job descriptions. A well-written job description equals higher quality candidates. If the job description is too broad or overly ambiguous, you'll find yourself with a great deal of applicants, albeit underqualified. Professionalism engenders professionalism. When external parties and applicants see the seriousness of the role and the rigor applied in writing the job description, your organization projects professionalism. Applicants want to work with professionals where they will have the opportunity to learn and grow. A poorly written job description can convey a contrary message and lead potential applicants to look elsewhere. So we're going to kind of cut into interviewing, which is once you post your job, you start getting your resumes, then you get into the interview portion. So when preparing to interview, not only are you judging the applicant, they're judging you. The first step is careful preparation, which in kind allows you to maximize the interview process. You should craft effective questions that will elicit responses that help you understand the applicant and assess their strengths and weaknesses. Well-crafted questions will greatly aid in determining whether the person makes sense for the role, your team, and the organization as a whole. Interviewing is a two-way process, and you should hone your listening skills as well as be aware of your body language and theirs. Candidates can give a great deal through their body language in conjunction with their answers. This greatly influences the type of responses you may receive and makes the interview more thorough. But the most important thing is that you have to be actively listening and aware. Finally, make providing information greater insight about the job and benefits can help you win favor with applicants who have the essential skills. People want to work with good people who they ideally like. You are essentially selling the organization, and they're trying to sell you on who and why they should be there. When I interview candidates, I generally break the interview into 3 sections. I go over the job description in depth with the candidate to let them know what we're looking for and try to add more meat to the bones. I then go over their resume in depth and refer to the notes on their resume that I want to talk about. This allows me to understand more about their job history, and it can prove fruitful in learning more about the applicant. Finally, I ask them 10 to 20 questions based on how much time I've allotted for the interview. I try to make it as conversational as possible and to be as friendly as possible as to, ease any of their fears or worries. I find that applicants are more forthcoming with their answers if they're comfortable with you. This isn't an exact science, but you can create the process that makes the most sense for your office. So we're going to go more into interview questions. Before you begin interviewing, you should develop all of your questions that you will want to ask all applicants. I generally like to ask candidates the same questions, as it helps me compare their responses and helps me narrow the group down to final candidates. Furthermore, it helps ensure fairness in making the final choice. You want to stay away from your bias and unevenly apply standards. Your questions should be a mix, and you generally want to stay away from yes and no questions. Yes and no questions do not further help you understand the applicant. I find that open-ended questions are the best and get you considerably more information, and it makes the interview more of a conversation and less interview-like. A resume and cover letter can only tell you so much, so this is your opportunity to get as much information from the candidate as you possibly can. There are some sample behavioral questions that can aid you in getting in the mindset of your applicant. Behavioral questions are great for generating interest, answers, and depending on how the applicant answers, you can understand how they might respond to stress, fast-paced environments, how they work with others, and what their ultimate goals are. These are my favorite types of questions, and I find these to be some of the most fruitful because they are unexpected and require someone to think on their feet. I also use this to determine their commitment and whether they are team-oriented. So if you look at the slide, there are a few questions there that you can use in preparing for your own interviews. So a few are: describe an innovative process that you proposed from a previous employer. Tell me about one of the toughest groups with which you've had to work. What made the group tough? What did you do? Give me an example of a time you disagreed with a directive given from your supervisor, and what happened? And where do you see yourself in 5 years? So those are just some questions that I think are good to ask, but if you have your own questions, as long as they're open-ended, I think you'll get the responses you're looking for. To continue with the interview questions piece, if you aren't paying attention, I encourage you to tune in now. So this is very important. Interviewing can be a very interesting process, but you also need to be very careful, especially if you are new to interviewing. Asking the wrong questions can leave you very open to a lawsuit. So, for example, let's say you're looking at Jane Doe's resume and you see that they went to your alma mater and that they're a Girl Scout leader. In your attempt to get to know them better, you ask what year they graduated from college and if they have any kids. Innocent enough, correct? Well, surprise, you've just potentially walked into a discrimination lawsuit. It's imperative to remember you're trying to get to know them better as to how it relates to the position and final hiring process. Going beyond that could land you in trouble. If the applicant doesn't get the job, they may recall the question you asked and determine that you didn't hire them based on X, Y, and Z. While your intentions were good, it is ultimately the impact. According to David Curtis, he's a partner at a big Dallas law firm, Inappropriate questions during hiring are a major source of lawsuits. Most illegal questions occur when an employer asks an applicant for information where the answer tends to affect a protected group, such as minorities, women, the disabled, legal aliens, and individuals over 40, or where the question is not related to essential job functions. So you always want to keep your questions related to the job based on nothing personal. The potential legal problems include, but are not limited to, violations of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 1991, the Discrimination in Employment Act of 1967, and the Americans with Disability Act of 1991. So there are some questions that you should avoid, and I'll get into that a little later. I do want to say I'm not giving you legal advice, but this slide highlights some of the things you should avoid asking. As you can see, there are unacceptable and acceptable techniques to find out what you're looking for. Asking discriminatory questions can have serious consequences and can land you in a lot of trouble. So some examples of unacceptable questions are listed on the slide. So, if you're looking to find out about reliability, asking obviously number of children they have, unacceptable. But you can ask, what hours and days can you work? For attendance, if you find out if they mention kids and you're asking them who's going to babysit, that can get you in trouble. But you can ask, are there specific times that you cannot work? You should never ask how old you are, and no question just in general about age. Where are your parents from? You should never ask. So just if you go down this list of questions, these are questions you should avoid, and I would say avoid anything that touches on, like I said, anything personal or anything related to a protected class. So here are some things to avoid when you're interviewing your applicant. So you've made it through the process, you've asked your questions. Some things you don't want to do is you don't want to make a promise you can't keep. So you want to avoid making promises about job security or, even a salary you can't guarantee. And, you want to also stay in your lane. Don't make promises or predictions about the organization's budgets, forecasts, or past performances. Hopes for the future are completely acceptable, but don't overdo it. You don't want to create an unrealistic expectation by painting yourself into a corner. And don't grossly mischaracterize the job position. If they accept a certain job, but later find they're doing different duties or an entirely different job, employees may have grounds to sue. Arbitrarily changing the role to another role is disingenuous, and if you're trying to build a culture, you undercut your efforts by misleading potential employees. While in most instances I don't think people would get litigious, you should generally err on the side of caution and stick with keeping to the formalized interview process. This is especially for new managers and interviewers.
Okay, I think it is a good time to pause and ask for questions here. This is Vanna coming back. I know that we have talked about some best practices for job postings as well as some best practices for interviewing, and so I wanted to pause briefly here before we get into the next section. I think Crystal mentioned early on that she's expecting, and I want to give her a chance to catch her breath here and grab some water. But in the meantime, I know that she listed a number of different ways that you can ask questions, some unacceptable ways and some acceptable ways. So I wanted to pause here to see if anyone had any questions, some general questions about job posting best practices or about interviewing best practices before we move on to the next section. So any questions? Again, to ask questions, there's two ways. You can either click the raise my hand icon or type your question into the questions box, and I'll get Crystal to answer them before we move on. Let's see, any questions about job postings or hiring best practices? Okay, I don't see any, so Crystal, I'll turn it over to you to move on. And again, we'll open up the floor for questions again at the end of the webinar. So if some come up throughout the duration, just jot them down, and we'll, or you can raise your hand while Crystal is speaking, and I will get you squeezed in. So Crystal, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. So we're going to kind of move forward and go to scouting and recruitment. So we're kind of going a little backwards because by the time you're doing your interview, you probably should have already done this piece. However, finding the right person for the job is more than just advertising the position on a listserv or on your website. The more specialized the position, the more difficult it can be to find the ideal candidate for the role. So scouting and recruitment can be tricky, but it really doesn't have to be. Finding talent can be a chore, especially if you're on a short time frame, as most people are in the political arena. It really comes down to planning and leveraging your network. So the first thing you want to do, as it says on the slide, is leverage your network. Reach out to people you know. Your reach will increase exponentially and allows you to find candidates quickly. Cast a large net. So you don't want to limit your search to just traditional channels. If you're looking to get diverse candidates, you can go to you can go to the same sources and expect a different result. Use websites that reach large audiences, and if your budget permits, you can post on fee sites, which can attract better candidates. This is especially good for highly technical roles. You also want to use referrals. So people often know people, they will vouch for you and have greater confidence in the applicant pool because they come highly recommended. You also want to create a pipeline. You should hang on to all the resumes and notes of people you've interviewed. Just because a person wasn't ideal for that particular role, they could be good for another role within your organization. So having a pipeline of applicants who've already been interviewed can help in getting qualified people in roles much faster. A pipeline might just be an online folder with all the applicants for a certain position, or if budget permits, a resume bank of tagged resumes. No matter the route, you have the library of candidates that can be quickly considered. So you need to know the type of person you're looking for. That's why the job description and where you advertise the job is very important. It will help you locate the best and brightest folks for the role. I tend to use sites that are Democratic leaning, such as Manito's List, Democratic Gain, and NOI, for example. These sites are free to post, and I know that within Democratic circles, peruse these particular sites. I don't limit my advertisement of the jobs to just those sites, and you'll find that you should strategically place job posts to where you think the talent would be for your position. Also, you should have an organizational strategy in place so that in all the organizations know the process and how to go about optimizing the process. Finally, employ social media like Facebook, Twitter, etc. to let people know that you're looking for talent. Not only is social media free, but the landscape is quite broad. Continuing, picking the right person means you have to effectively weigh all the elements of their qualifications as it relates to the role. I generally ask myself the following questions. Can they perform the core requirements? At minimum, whoever is a finalist should be able to meet the minimum requirements laid out in the job description. Anything else is just icing on the cake. What are their strengths and weaknesses? In business school, we were taught to conduct a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Applied to hiring, you are looking at the applicant's perceived strengths and weaknesses and how it aligns with your team. In terms of opportunities and threats, you need to examine how you can best utilize this person for your department, organization, objectives as it relates to external opportunities or threats. In short, in building your team, how can this person complement your efforts and contribute to what you've determined success should be? Do they have the skills to grow and expand beyond the role? Ideally, you should hire someone who can perform the role but has the capacity and will grow and take on more. Campaigns and state parties often have to do more with less, and you need a multidimensional player who can handle varying tasks. Can the person work with your team? This is critical. The person you hire on top of having the person you hire on top of having the requisite skills needs to be a team player. There is nothing worse than a team killer who disrupts the energy and thus creates problems for you as a manager because they didn't fit in with your team or your organizational structure. Can they work within the culture? Choose wisely. As I stated previously, a bad hire can be an immense distraction and can take away from your objectives. What qualifications do they have outside the job description? I consider skills outside of the job description to be a bonus. It's one more tool that you'll have in your toolbox when an applicant is capable of bringing more unique skills to the role. Refer to your interview notes and compare each person's responses. And remember to refer to your notes if you interview a great deal of people so that you can compare objectively and fairly evaluate each applicant. I also want to stress that you make sure you check professional references and also conduct background investigations. So I can't emphasize more. Some mechanism for background checks should be definitely implemented. Because of the nature of our work, an embarrassing hire or person with a questionable background can derail your organization. It could be a bad news story that creates distraction, or think about some of those campaign horror stories you've heard of or read. Perhaps the background check would elicit that information out before bringing on a person who may adversely impact your organization. Now we're going to get into the management piece and kind of talk about how you create a culture, create the culture for your organization with the applicant. So establishing a team culture should be a careful and deliberate process. It starts at the job description and carries on into the interview. You should clearly project the type of person you're looking for. You can't just say the culture is one way. You have to truly be the culture that you profess. It is important for effective engagement and ensuring that the new hire acclimates well into the organization and hits the ground running. You also have to consider engagement culture through diversity and inclusion. Diversity of hires is critical, and it helps inform you of other perspectives and helps you identify with a broader audience. Diversity and inclusion go hand in hand and are mutually exclusive. Not only should you strive for diversity for the sake of the team dynamic and the greater culture as a whole, it's important to foster an environment that makes people feel included. Everyone wants to be a part of something, and it's your job to make sure that that happens. You should also be welcoming. You're the first person that they will interact with, and you set the tone for the rest of the organization. You should personalize the experience, because a personalized experience helps during the onboarding process and helps the new hire embrace the culture and values of the organization. Recruitment strategies should reflect the kind of organization, the kind of person your organization wants to attract. When recruiting, you should always actively think about your culture and type of people would help build on that and build on what currently exists. So now we're going to get into performance management. I'm sure you've experienced an angry manager that storms into your office and states how poorly a staffer is doing and how it's not working out. The real question is, have you told the staffer what they're doing wrong? How can we expect someone to improve if they aren't aware of what they're doing wrong? Many managers have the tendency to avoid tough conversations with their staff as it relates to performance, often allowing the performance issue to linger on until it reaches a point of no return. I had a former boss tell me, it is your responsibility to let staff know how they're doing, and I 100% agree with that. If we are to be effective managers, we have to let staff know how they're doing, and remember, a performance review is more than just providing feedback. Feedback needs to be honest, objective, and clear-cut. How can a staffer improve if you never tell them what they're doing well or not so well? You do yourself as a manager a disservice when you do not effectively communicate with your staff. Many performance issues are preventable. If you arm your staff with the information or tools they need to do their job, and from a managerial perspective, if there are performance issues, you now have the opportunity to properly document, which is very important, the issues and provide the person with the opportunity to improve. If the employee's performance does not improve, at least you were fair and gave the person an opportunity to change their circumstances. Have a set time to conduct performance reviews. Without a set time frame, reviews will get pushed back and may never happen. This allows you to properly prepare and approach the process objectively. It should be viewed as a, it shouldn't be viewed as a chore, excuse me, but a chance to sit down with your staffer and have a frank discussion. I guarantee the staffer wants to know how they are doing. The resistancy effective is a psychological term, and according to dictionary.com, is the phenomenon that when people are asking to recall any order of items on a list, those that come at the end of the list are more likely to be recalled than the others. I once had a boss tell me, "You're only as good as your last performance." But we need to remember as managers, we should strive to be objective and focus on the defined review period of which you are judging the staffer's work. We are all susceptible to focus on just what just happened as opposed to the body of work during the defined time frame. So continuing with that, a pat on the back goes a long way, and many times we don't hear from our boss unless something went wrong. According to a survey, the data suggests that baby boomers who want their objectives to be left alone or to execute. Generation Y wants an almost constant stream of feedback. 80% of millennials said they want regular feedback from their managers, and 75% of millennials yearn for mentors. This data is quite telling, particularly for young workers. Also, in lieu of pay, recognition can go a long way and help keep morale high. A component of the review process should address what do they want to do, or where do they want to go. This is important for two reasons. You can help align their skills around what they enjoy doing, what makes their role more fulfilling, and boast a greater return on your investment, the culture and the organization. Conversely, if you find that they don't enjoy some aspects of their role, you can figure out the best way to leverage their contributions to your overall objective and make better use of their contributions. Approaching performance reviews as a thoughtful and collaborative process helps take the negativity out of the process. And finally, you need to show that you care enough to help focus on where they want to go in life. This helps the team dynamic and fosters loyalty. And as we all know, loyalty in an organization is priceless. So in designing and revamping your performance review should be a deliberate process that should capture the needs and expectations of both employees and managers. The performance review should also capture the value of the organization so that everyone has buy-in. As we all know, oftentimes people dread performance reviews. To mitigate those feelings, make sure everyone is included in the process. This includes training staff on its importance, its purpose, and why the performance review is set up the way it is. Getting everyone on the same page and purpose of the performance review takes a lot of the negativity out of the process. This also helps with rolling out the performance review process as to minimize resistance to change or people who are just used to doing things the same old way. The performance review doesn't have to be a thesis. It should be the right size for the organization. A defined time frame you should have to complete and what you're ultimately trying to accomplish. So, resources. There are a great deal of sites that address many of the topics covered today. In addition to the web, you should use each other as state leaders to develop best practices. I encourage collaboration as you all implement, tweak, or overhaul your hiring and management processes. Many of you are already doing great things in your respective states, and I know you have a great deal to share that would help your fellow colleagues. I also recommend sharing posing challenges and questions that you have with each other so that a solution can be quickly applied. Finally, refine your process. I find small tweaks and improvements greatly help as it relates to hiring and management. So the next couple of slides are just going to show some great resources if you are looking to hire, recruit, some great HR resources for legal advice, so on and so forth. So I'm just going to kind of click on that. So if you want to review some of these, most of what you need will be available online, as I've said. I've listed some of the sources I've used to develop this presentation, as well as sources I use on a regular basis in performing my duties at the DNC. So if you want to kind of just do a quick scroll through these, and these are some other tools and sites that are helpful as well. And finally, if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me. My email is listed on this slide. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And again, forgive me. I'm having some challenges over here as far as my breathing goes. But thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to kick it back over to Vanna.
Great. Thank you, Crystal, for that wonderful presentation. I hope that you all were able to jot down quite a bit of what she was saying. And as I mentioned halfway through the presentation, we were going to open up the floor again on the back end. I know that we have a lot of new staff out in the States, so if you all have any questions for Crystal, now is the time to ask. I know that we had a question asked earlier. Let me go back and relocate that, and I'll ask that. Give me just a second here. There's I guess sort of a question here. If you can go back to the resource slide, the first resource slide. And just so you all know, I think that there's a feature on GoToWebinar that allows you to screenshot the slide that is there. So if there's a slide throughout our webinar series, or today in particular, if you want to screenshot that slide, I believe you can go to one of the buttons at the top right of your GoToWebinar module, the actual screen where her slide is showing, and you can screenshot that. But we did have a question earlier. Let me go back and look at it. So a question for you, Crystal. Let me read it slowly because it's kind of long here. There's a lot of overlapping responsibility with technology and software advances. How do you build in flexibility so that there is an umbrella job that oversees a bunch of different aspects? I guess a best practice for a job that sort of does a number of different things. And then while Crystal is thinking on that, if any other states, if we've got some experienced folks on here who would want to share a best practice on that end, feel free to chime in. But that's sort of the question with all the advances in technology and software. How do you build in flexibility so that there's just one umbrella job that oversees those aspects, like NGP VAM? And I asked for the person to elaborate, and they said something like NGP VAM. That's a job by itself, but the ED is responsible for it.
So I think, I'm not sure, and if I'm not answering the question, please let me know. So for Vanna, I'm understanding that in a sense you're asking about a job that kind of encompasses multiple roles or multiple duties, and how you would kind of, is that the question? I could be unclear. Okay, so to answer that, I would say working in this arena, most jobs kind of have multiple duties and multiple roles. I think the best way to do that, I mean, if you're referring to the job posting or the job description, there's always a bullet that you can use that you can say other duties as assigned, which leaves the job open. So like when you're doing your job description that you posted, you put the other duties as assigned. That kind of leaves it very much open for you to kind of add other responsibilities or duties. Also, I would say it could be a selling point if you have someone who's doing, multiple duties, or if you want to sell that to an interviewer or a person that's coming to work with you, you can sell it as there's growth, there's learning opportunities. This is something you can add on your resume. So I think there are ways. I mean, most of the jobs in the political arena kind of are that way. You're doing multiple roles at one time. So if when you're in the interview process, you want to kind of let them know, hey, this is how this goes in this arena, but sell it as a positive and make sure you're letting them know this is an area for growth. These are things you can learn, expand your portfolio, expand your resume, so on and so forth. So I hope that answers the question, but I'll let Vanna.
I believe so. And Terry, you can you can type something else into the questions box to confirm, but she also made the comment before you responded that she was referring to some of the smaller state parties that have smaller staffs, you know, when they bring on a person that will do multiple different jobs, just sort of how you build that into the job. How do you create that job description that oversees tons of different jobs in one? But I think you answered it. I think that's a good best practice of other things as assigned. And again, if anyone else has any questions or any comments about some things that you have done at your state party, if we've got some older staff on, feel free to chime in, but just type them into the questions box or click the raise my hand icon and we will unmute you. Okay. I don't see any other questions here. I'm going back and forth with my scrolling. And you all, once again, if Crystal, if you will put it on, go back to the slide where your contact information is. If any of you at the conclusion of the webinar have any additional questions for Crystal, feel free to send her an email as well, and I'm sure she'll gladly answer those for you. So one more sweep through the questions box just to make sure we are not leaving any hands out or any questions unanswered. Okay, I don't see any here. So with that, I will wrap us up this afternoon. Thank you so much, Crystal, for joining us. I know that you were winded throughout the webinar, but I definitely appreciate you taking the time to join us and present today. Some wonderful information there as it relates to hiring practices and things that will keep your state party out of trouble as you're looking to bring new people on this year. Again, if you all have any additional questions for Crystal, feel free to reach out to her. Always definitely reach out to your legal counsel if you have questions about things prior to, you know, going into them. So reach out to your legal counsel as well. So with that, again, thanks, Crystal. Thanks to all of our attendees for joining us this afternoon. We certainly appreciate you all being with us for this afternoon's webinar. And I guess we will see you on next Thursday, where we will begin our digital sort of boot camp, our digital webinar series, and an announcement will go out about that on next week. So you all have a great rest of your Thursday and a great rest of your week. And we will talk to you on next Thursday. Thank you. Bye.